All right. Hello, guys. This is Well Made's host, Susan M. Thank you for joining us again for another episode of just casual mental health conversations and modern mental health stories with me. And I brought an exciting guest speaker today. His name is Ryan Rodgers, as you can tell, and he is the Director of Business Development of Ptsd Foundation of America, and he is also a board member of Arise Veteran Foundation and also a U.S. Army veteran. So welcome, Ryan.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good to be here. I'm excited.
Good to be here. Yeah, we were actually catching up before this video started, and you were saying that you're such an early riser. What time did you say you wake up again?
Typically between 4 and 5.
Okay.
Yeah, like I'm excited if I get to sleep until like 7. My body doesn't let me, even no matter what time I go to bed. I go to bed at like midnight. I'm waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning going,
It's really impressive. By any chance, just out of curiosity, considering that you served in the military, what are like morning times for, when you were serving? Because I'm not familiar.
Usually like in the mornings, like probably about 4 o'clock, get up, shave, and then it was physical training. PT was done at between 4:30 and 5:30, usually every morning. And that kind of gets your body going, and even mentally too as well. Get you going, get some of those endorphins going in your body. So a very important time.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, full disclosure, I think my best days are 6 a.m., but these days I'm waking up at 8, or 7:30. So a little bit closer to your 4, but really. So, I mean, again, thank you for joining. I'm really excited for this talk because, I mean, first of all, we just, Memorial Day just passed for those who are viewing who are based in the U.S., and it's an incredibly important day for the United States. Yes, it is a federal holiday, but it's also a time to memorialize and celebrate the sacrifices of people who have served and protected our country and our country's interests and our citizens. So just like before we go into all this mental health talk, I wanted to kind of ask how Memorial Day weekend was for you specifically, considering you have served.
I kind of have like a love-hate relationship with that holiday because of the things that it does, like to me personally, like the wounds that it really kind of brings back up and reopens of, a lot of my friends and colleagues that I have lost, and not just, in combat, but it really like more after, the war than way more after the war than, I've lost it, during the war. Here at the campus, we have, like flags with names of the individuals, and a couple of the names had fallen off and they were on the grass, and I had, went back inside to grab something to hang the names back on, and something that seems to be so like trivial in nature just really for a little bit just really kind of messed me up, because like these are names of my colleagues that I'm hanging back on these flags. So it's very difficult to be able to kind of do those things. It's very necessary, but yet very difficult for, and for me personally to be able to go back and do that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think it's great to hear personally about someone who's actually had firsthand experience and has friends who have served on the military, because it's a totally different thing experiencing the weekend as like a extended 3-day, we don't have to work on Monday, versus actually coming back to why we have Memorial Day in the first place, and the incredible loss or the incredible just the service that you and your colleagues have kind of contributed to our country. So just thank you for that. And Memorial Day in the sense of, celebrating you all. But yeah, just so I obviously have gotten the chance and the pleasure of knowing you, but just for the people who are watching, can you kind of give a bit of a story behind you, how you came to kind of be involved in all these foundations, where you're based, and yeah, just a little bit about what you're doing right now.
Sure. I from a very, very young age, I wanted to join the military. In fact, I originally was going to join the Navy and be a corpsman, which is like almost like a field surgeon. And then a friend of mine come to me and said, "Hey, you know, the Army is paying an extra $110 a month to jump out of planes." I was like, "I get paid extra to jump out of planes? I'm so doing that." Went to the recruiter and said, "I don't even care what I do as long as they jump out of planes." That's the recruiter's like, "Yeah, this guy's a sucker. I got him." But I absolutely loved it. I loved the military. I loved the culture. I loved the structure. I loved. I wanted to retire out of the military, do 20 plus years, and for me, the military was very, very easy as long as you did what you were told. I mean, it was simple. I mean, other than the physical aspects were really brutal. But other than that, it was simple. Until I got hurt in OIF1, and that really ended my military career. And I didn't really have any quote unquote usable job skills that were transferable to the civilian sector. I was infantry. To be kind of blunt about what my job was, is I trained how to kill. That was my job, and there's not a high demand for that in the civilian sector. It's
Right,
just
and white collar office space.
yeah, exactly.
I'm not even sure security personnel that's hired. I don't actually think that they are, that's the level of capability there.
Mhm. Yeah. So it's definitely not a marketable job skill. Yeah, there was a lot of other like soft skills and other things that came with that, but
Mhm.
so I had some experience with construction. So I'm like, well, I'll just go ahead and start my own business and do construction, and did really, really well up until the economic downturn. As we were living in St. Louis at the time. Um, and we had two car manufacturing plants that closed at like nearly the same time. So it was just like a substantial hit for us. And up until that point, it's kind of weird. It's like Lemony Snicket's series of unfortunate events. Up until that point, I was able to still do some physical stuff, but then my health kind of tanked at the same time, and it tanked so hard that my wife literally thought that I was going to die. So she started making like funeral arrangements, and I mean, she was getting the affairs in order because I was so sick. And fast forward a little bit, just kind of get to where I'm at now. Like I totally, completely had to reinvent myself. I'm not an office type person. I don't like being in the office. I like being outside. I like being physical. I'm very physical in nature. So,
Right.
you know, having to go through vocational rehabilitation in the VA and, get my bachelor's degree, and then, continue on to get my master's. And now I'm working on finishing my doctorate. If you would have asked me like 10 years ago and kind of like done some, projections, like, do you think you'll ever be as far as you are with education? I'm like, I don't want to get educated. That's no, I'm a girl, and I don't want to do any of that. And it's kind of strange that we're breaching this door right now as it is. But it it really, the finding purpose in what I was doing, like especially when it come to work,
Mm-hmm.
uh, was actually stumbling. I we lost everything, and then we moved out to California. And I'm like, well, what do? I go back to what I know.
Right.
But what I know I wasn't able to do that physically. I just couldn't do it physically anymore.
Right.
And I found a veteran services to helping them veterans get jobs. And then that's where I found my niche. That's where I knew that this is helping veterans in one capacity or another was what I wanted to do continually. And then I've done it ever since in one capacity or another.
That's amazing. How old were you when you joined the army, and when was how old were you when you were discharged because of that injury?
I was 18 when I joined, and then I think I was 27 or 28 when I was, discharged with injuries. So, I mean, still very, very young.
Yeah, very young. So you went through all that, and you're it's in your formative years, truly, because technically we only fully enter adulthood or like stabilize when you're 26, 27. So that must have been really formative to you. Yeah, so like just kind of like broaching on, your current works, with the PTSD Foundation of America. Um, for people who aren't familiar with the term PTSD, it's post traumatic stress disorder. Um, and, uh, your involvement with the Arise Veteran Foundation, which is veterans friendly, which means that it, serves veterans, but also their families. You're really, really kind of like in the core of um, helping kind of improve the well-being of your veterans community and having them re-enter society, but also really, really tackling very serious issues that they are having to, work with after serving. So what are those kind of issues? Like for example, of course we are talking about PTSD here, but just what are the kind of issues that, as you said, right, like trouble finding a viable work scenario because your skill set just isn't a fit? Like what kind of dilemmas does that lead to, for any male or female soldier? Not soldier, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's, I think if we go back and we look at the complexity of, the transition process, essentially when you go in and you enter into the military, um, without candy coating it, you're brainwashed to think a very certain way. Your day is totally and completely regimented. Like, I mean, scheduled from when you wake up to when you go to sleep. There's things that are scheduled.
Mhm.
You always know what's expected of you. It's very clear. It's concise. So you're even in for a 3-year period, and you talk about like in your formative years. So like in your early or your late teens, still formulated, and you're taught to think you're a certain way. You're taught to act a certain way. There's a lot of reconditioning that happens, during that process to make you military ready. That's just part of what it is. And then
Mhm.
after that transition process, it is literally it's not like a job, but there's something totally completely different from it. Yeah, the military is a job in itself, but there's a paradigm shift. So like if I'm changing jobs and say I want to, go to move to another place, I'm essentially doing pretty close to the same job. And a lot of these other things are provided for me.
Right.
One thing that happens is very, very different from a military transition is that everything it's changed. Your regimen is no longer there. The food sources and your medical, all the things that were normally taken care of are no longer there. You don't have somebody, regimenting and telling you like, hey, from X to Z, these are the things that we need to accomplish during this day. So it is a 100% or 180-degree difference from what you're conditioned to be like. So just even in that realm, thinking about that, what that kind of does.
Extreme scenarios, extreme transition or expectations, things like that.
Absolutely, it does. It's very hard to adjust. It's like, I guess if I could use an example, like, somebody who's smoking, just say, oh, just go cold turkey. You could totally do it, and which some people can, but it's a very difficult transition to be able to have one specific way of life and then just automatically, boom, just readjust to where you were. Um,
Right.
and
So yeah, so that transition, essentially, you're saying, like, even while you're serving is very much a constant expectation, but also, I imagine, after serving and you trying to re-enter civilian life, that's also a very abrupt change and really, I would say, like, influential to one's, emotional and mental state.
yeah, and like the transition thing, going back to that again, there's one thing that is very uniquely different about this series of conflicts. Uh, you know, Prior to, like, okay, we put a look at World War II. World War II, like the individuals that were gone and fighting, they were gone for about 2 to 3 years. But once they were back, they were done. They were back.
Mhm.
Vietnam, they got drafted. They served one tour over in Vietnam. And the only way that they would ever go back is if they volunteered to go back. Um, the 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 distinct difference between this one is that you can have an individual. In fact, I have a friend who deployed 7 times. That's 7 years of being in a combat environment. And imagine what that'll do to someone's psyche. That you're 1 year you're in a combat environment, and then the next year you're in a non-combat environment. Oh,
Mhm.
transition. Then you're going back to a combat environment. So imagine like what that does to a person's, um, you know, mental capacities. Like, okay, transition out of that.
Yeah, like
Um,
you're on fight mode and you're trained to be on fight mode, and then you're back to civilian life and then also back to fight mode, and it's just a complete switch. It's like a switch almost on and off, and that's being expected of a human.
yeah,
Wow.
and as you know, it doesn't work that way. It just
Yeah,
doesn't.
right. So, in terms of for you, let's say, or like speaking of a colleague that might have experienced like a longer time in the military, like what are some, like, what happens when you're not able to really switch off and fully kind of re-enter civilian life? Like,
I don't think that switching off is really kind of the right terminology, because we've been conditioned to like think and look at things very, very differently. But there
mhm,
is a level of that it's non-productive, where it is, it produces anxiety. Like, there's a level of like hypervigilance or vigilance
mhm,
that is a good thing to have. It's not, but once it becomes start to become unproductive to where, you're paranoid over everything and you won't leave your house, that's not productive. So there are certain, traits that come with this that can be, if they're managed well, that can be very good things. It's just when these things come unchecked and they just start to escalate, and the cut off from others, and the constantly on guard no matter where you're at. There's Once it starts to get past the level, it's not productive for you as a person.
right. No, thank you for sharing. Um, Would you mind me asking, have you ever personally, like when you were 18 to 27, or like after 27, you said that, of course, you did have that dilemma of trying to figure out, what's the next steps for me and for my family. But like, for example, have you developed PTSD yourself? Or, yeah, just wanted to ask, considering that it's such a prevalent thing in the military.
um, yeah, actually, I have, and it's kind of interesting, because I was a person who, up until later, totally believed that anxiety was um, it was a psychosomatic. It wasn't even real. It was like, you're forming that in your brain. It's not real,
Mm,
until like I started experiencing some of that. And for me, like the military taught me one culture way. It was like, you suck it up and you drive on. You don't seek help. If you broke your foot or something, um, it's like their cure all was have some Motrin and drink some water and you'll be fine. It's very frowned upon to get any kind of assistance, because it's all about functionality, and your body, it's functionality, and that's like literally what, our bodies are machines, especially being in infantry. So the you have to keep that well maintained. If there is even part of it that's not, it's like, okay, now we're not potentially ready to be able to deploy or whatever it is. So mental health and physical health, um, any kind of injuries or anything, were really kind of frowned upon with you seeking assistance to get care for those.
Oh, so would you say like the stigma is higher than what you see, I guess, in essentially like non-military life, civilian life?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's very frowned upon to, there's also some other implications too, with that in the military, it's part of your job. There's not too many civilian jobs, and there are some. There's not too many civilian jobs that if you have issues mentally, you could lose your job over. But for example, if you have a top secret clearance and you get diagnosed with some type of mental disorder, you lose your top secret clearance. So you can no longer do that job. So there's a lot of other things that are attached to it. It's not as simple
Right.
as, you can't just assign it to something and be like, oh, well, we'll just take care of it this way. It doesn't work that way.
Right. I mean, something about that really resonates with me because I think with mental health, there's just so much stigma, and a lot of it's like systematically kind of perpetuated. As you said, it's not just about like the individuals, but just also the way systems are structured, or like the U.S. Army is structured. As you said, like if someone can lose um, essentially an opportunity um, to serve in a higher role and to be able to essentially have the possibility of losing that clearance, security clearance, things like that, that jeopardizes all aspects of your livelihood, not just, you know, uh, your initial state of mental or emotional well-being. So thanks for, I didn't know that that was that severe or strict, but it does make sense to a certain point. But so if that happens, I can't imagine just like having to kind of, as a human, I guess the whole point is that we are, for us to experience catharsis, for us to experience and be capable of healthily processing our emotions, it's a very, very fundamental component of staying healthy. And if that's something that's not as encouraged in active service, what are the kind of what can happen negatively after? So, like, obviously, there are these foundations that support veterans, and there are these foundations because there's such a huge need. But what kind of scenarios, like these stress scenarios, what do they look like? As you said, you have colleagues, and
So, I mean, if we were to look at post-traumatic stress disorder and other things, it really just, it centers around trauma. And when an individual does not get some type of assistance, or they're able to do productive coping mechanisms to help kind of deal with the trauma that they've experienced, majority of the time they go back to destructive coping mechanisms: alcohol, substance abuse, anger. And that is their way of kind of expressing the pain. It's not productive, but that's how they're expressing, the things that they're going through, the isolation, the outburst. I mean, that's how they're emotionally expressing, what they're feeling inside. It's not productive by any means. Sometimes they get so severe that they become homeless. I mean, that's why a lot of times the marriages are failing, afterwards, is because this individual, this veteran, or even service member, does not get the assistance that they need. So they suffer in silence.
right. Can I ask you, like, what are some specific, so I am taking a guess here, but you might have some colleagues that have, like, that you've just seen exhibiting behaviors showing that they're struggling. What does that look like specifically to someone who was a veteran member? Like, are they, you said hypervigilance, that taken to an extreme can be not productive, but what does that look like, for example, as you said, in the home? Like, what are some scenarios?
I think the biggest um, thing that I've seen, the most common theme is the detachment, the mental detachment, the isolation, even if it's not like a physical isolation, like moving from one room to another. It's a mental isolation. It's a withdrawal, because for some reason or another, they have the belief that, um, the inadequacy, because they don't feel like they have a purpose. And that's one of the things that, in military culture is you have a purpose, you have a mission, you have a task, these are the standards that you need to achieve. So if you get out and you struggle with that piece of it, that's part of who, you've been conditioned to be. So not having those key points, you then start to withdraw and pull away from interactions of any sort, or you manifest those interactions into things that are not productive for relationship building.
Would you say that emotions of, like, helplessness or worthlessness ever come up, or is it more of a fact of just complete dissonance and emotional detachment?
It depends on the individual, but yeah, those are helplessness and worthlessness. Be like, because again, going back to the cultures, like I had a purpose, I had a mission, and I was relied upon. My the role and the task that I did was literally life and death. It mattered. It hinged upon life and death. That's how important my role was. So I mean, taking it to one extreme, this role that I'm doing, in the military is a matter of life and death. And then, okay, now your new role is you're just punching numbers on a widget. I mean, that's a totally and completely different realm of extremes.
Yeah. I would say that as a civilian, right, for us, we know more often than not, the we do not have the shared experience of hitting that extreme of purpose and mission. You can obviously find purpose and mission in your work, whether it be in the office space, and that's all relative to the individual. But when it comes to, like, situational things, we just never experience it. So for us, it seems pretty normal to find, like, meaning. It seems pretty feasible and easy to find meaning and purpose in our daily works, right? Like helping a company reach its goals or milestones, or things that I would say for someone who has experienced a different kind of narrative that's just so much more heavy and just expectations, and it's very, as you said, regimented, extreme expectations. I feel like coming back into it, as you say, it's almost like a shock. And even if they are relative, right? It's like comparing apples and oranges. You can find meaning in both places. There is purpose, and there's a specific need for any individual to contribute to X thing. I can imagine that from a subjective standpoint, that it could be an emotional and mental shock and just cause someone to feel disengaged. Wow. So yeah, just talking about that, and like with your current work with those two foundations, what's the current stats? Like, how many people are coming to you for help, or how many veterans are you serving? What does it look like right now?
For us as an organization, we're at the PTSD Foundation of America, and Arise. There's a couple of little niches that we do differently at the PTSD Foundation. We serve combat vets and their families. Very holistic kind of viewpoint where anything that has gotten a veteran to the point to where they become unproductive in society and just in life in general, we're going to address it, and we're going to walk them through that process and really get them to the point to where they establish their new norm that's functional, and productive and not destructive, because that's literally like they destroy everything around them when they're in that kind of state of really kind of searching and struggling. And the biggest bulk of who we serve as an organization is the Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, the OIF, OEF veterans, usually about 40 something years old, from 18 to 40 something, so that age range. And kind of a scary statistic with that age range too is that is also the highest rate of suicides in the veteran community.
All right. Do you mind just elaborating on Operation Enduring Freedom? I'm not familiar with that term, and I'm yeah.
So Iraqi Freedom is obviously Iraq, and Enduring Freedom is Afghanistan.
Oh, okay. Apologies. Thank you for explaining. Yeah. So, I mean, firstly, thank you for your work, all the work that you and your team's doing. I'm very curious, considering that your veteran members hypothetically are in a very unproductive state when they start engaging with, the support of your foundation, either of the two foundations you're involved with. Are they voluntarily coming to you for help, or is it usually their families or someone around them that essentially urge them to reach out? What does that look like? Because you did speak to a lot of stigma, just kind of being built into anyone who served. Like, it's just not natural for someone to be like very, hey, let's talk mental health, or let's get myself better, because there's nothing with me in the first place. Let's just suck it up. So just like thinking to that part you mentioned, it seems a little bit, I just imagine it'd be very difficult for me if I was a veteran to actually come to you for help.
And it is, that we're a very prideful bunch. That's like, we have pride in service. I mean, look at the, esprit de corps of a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. The pride in the service and that we have is very high. So to really kind of get to the point of, vulnerability, to where you say, like, I've got an issue and I need help. Going back to your point of like, where does those referrals and stuff come from? For us, it's literally like a mixture. It's a 50-50. It's almost dead straight across. And 50% of the veterans that need assistance come to us, and then another one is like reaching out family members, because they notice a difference. And when a lot of veterans are going through that, they internalize it, and it's like the outward appearance is what's wrong, not the inward. So all of these other people, that they have the issue, I don't have the issue, they have the issue. So it's a mix. It's kind of strange, where the veterans come to see us, and even with the rise, it's it could be like a family member, a mother, a father.
Right.
I've noticed something different about them. They're just not the same, or they've really started to isolate. And so this is the biggest piece of it, I guess. If you know an individual and you start to notice like behavior changes that are not normal for the person. You start isolating, anger outbursts, all of those things. That's when you really start to need to pay attention. In the assist training that we do, those are called invitations. They may not necessarily know that they're sending you invitations, but they are.
Right.
So those are key points to pay attention to.
Right. And sorry to interject, but just for people who aren't familiar with what an assist trainer is, can you briefly describe what that involves, what that basically means?
Yeah, so assist is a evidence-based training by Living Works LLC. It is applied suicide intervention skills training. They teach you how to do a suicide intervention. And really, I think a bigger part of it too is it really kind of um, teaches you how to notice. It teaches you active listening skills and teaches you what to look out for, which and before you may not have necessarily known as like a key indicator for someone
Right,
who is suicidal. So these are things like, oh wait, they said this. This is one of them key indicators. I need to pay attention to that.
right. Thank you for elaborating on that. I think, just going back to your use of the word invitations, I think that's very, very applicable for anyone who's a community member who's, notices behavior change in someone who might just be having who might be in like the troughs essentially of struggling with their mental health. Just because more often than not, I think it's the human tendency, right? Just because you don't want to overstep, you want to have that verbal invitation, like, "Hey, I need help." But
Hmm.
with mental health scenarios, also amongst the veterans community, you're not, as you said, like if it's a very prideful community, for example, you're not going to necessarily have the individual who either is willing to verbally ask for help and it's just not part of maybe their part of their identity to be doing that, like because maybe it's not proper or because they just feel prideful or because they don't know how to or because of some kind of societal stigma. Or it could also just be that they're literally not aware of, as you said, aware of the internal versus what's going on, like, and how they are affecting everybody else or how things are being affected. So I think that's very important to note. It's that these like nonverbal invitations are very important for us as community members and those that are loved ones of people who struggle with mental health or illness to just be really active, as you said, first in literacy. Of course, not everyone is planning to be taking courses and learning about suicide awareness and prevention and learning about indicators, but I do think that there's like a need across all elements of our community for that kind of education to be there, for that literacy to be there, because I do not know of many people who are familiar with, like, let's say in the workplace, even considering I am just a normal civilian who would just jump in and like ask, like, hey, are things going all right when they notice these kinds of signs? Because usually they're hesitant, like they don't want to um, imply like there's something wrong or this person's struggling with yeah, just emotionally and mentally struggling, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, right? Because you're trying to improve your life and empower your life. So I don't see fundamentally like the problem with that, but it's still a very big issue.
And I think a lot of that has to go back to, cultural norms in our society in America is very individualistic. Think about this for a moment. Um, in a normal conversation, if I am to say to you, "Hey, how's it going?" What is your response going to be?
Good. How is it? I'd be like, I'd just be like, it's like a water cooler conversation in the office. So you say, doing well.
Absolutely, yeah.
The weather's great.
And even if you are not, that will almost always be your response. So we are conditioned to for that to be our response, and that's
Right,
part of the things that we're not paying attention to. We're not listening because we're so very individualistic and we're very like bubbled as a society. Like we, these are the things that affect us as an individual, and I don't really purview outside of that bubble. I
right.
just don't. So a big part of it is taking an opportunity to be uncomfortable and
Mm.
and paying attention and getting in there and saying, hey, I noticed there were some things that you're not really acting kind of normal from what I've noticed. Are things going okay? And taking that opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to actually be vulnerable myself and ask these questions that are very uncomfortable. And it's like, well, he's prying, he's being so nosy.
Right.
Well, in the grand scheme of things, it's worth it. if you don't want to be that person that lives with regret for the rest of your life. Like, if I just asked one simple question, maybe I could have done something. Maybe I
Right.
could have done something.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of like invitations too is in verbal patterns and the things that you pay attention to. Majority of people don't speak in absolute terms unless we're defining something or we're talking about something specific. Then we tend to talk in absolutes. The times that you really have to pay attention to is whenever somebody speaks in absolute terms and it's followed with despair, meaning like I have everything figured out. This will all be over soon. Those types of terms that are spoken, that are very absolute statements, but there's a heaviness behind it. Those are the times, like, if I was to say that the biggest red flag that you could see, it would definitely be that right there. While it's not always the indicator, that is usually one of the biggest red flags of somebody who needs help.
Got it. Yeah, and I think to your thing about stepping out into uncomfortable conversations, um, I think that's something. I mean, I have definitely been trying to really do that. I think as someone who's in my late 20s, I still do, of course, struggle with like, will this person think I'm being, nosy, or am I being overbearing, or this isn't person who's a close friend of mine. So like, as you said, like it's social conditioning. Are they thinking like, why is she so like overly interested in my business?
Mhm.
But as you said, this is like a really important thing, and why not actually mean the questions we ask when we say how are you? And a colleague of mine was we were in a care meeting, which is essentially like how do we care for our community better, and like how do we be more careful about our words. She really talked about like how do we change the conversation or the context of how are you to really be like how are you really. And
Mhm.
at what point in a relationship or an encounter with an individual is it, like emotionally comfortably acceptable for you guys to say it? And we also came to the conclusion that there's just like a necessary element of being of discomfort. You
Oh,
have
yeah.
to, yeah, you
Mhm.
just have to take the first step. It's almost like saying like, hey, like I kind of am interested in being with you and being like it's essentially an indicator of a healthy relationship, but it's just so hard for us to, I think, cross that line with most of the people we know in our network outside of maybe family and a few close friends.
And you
Um,
and you really have to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
yeah,
Because no, it is human nature that if something is uncomfortable, what's the first thing you want to do? I want to avoid it. I want to avoid.
right,
I don't want to be. I want to be. I want to be comfortable.
right,
That is human nature. I want to be comfortable. But these things and this topic and this conversation, even mental health, it's not a comfortable conversation. Why?
right.
Because it's heavy and it's difficult to deal with. It's just it's hard to talk about like what's going on inside my head, But these are conversations that need to be had, because here's the other part of it too, is the more and more that it's talked about, and the more that mental health itself becomes a normalized conversation, like the same, like, hey, I broke my arm, hey, how's that healing, how's that doing? Mental health should have that same kind of freedom to be able to talk about as
Exactly.
well. But that comes with normalizing the conversation about it. Not necessarily normalizing the things that happen within it, but just normalizing the conversation and saying, hey, how's that going for you?
Yeah. And I do, just out of kind of grounding this all in realism, I do feel like this is definitely a call for, top down leadership actions to happen, because if this is unfamiliar kind of territory, like we're not all just comfortable asking about these, like, how's your mental doing versus like, how's your broken arm doing?
Mhm.
It's definitely something like, for example, I had a couple of interns for the summer last year, and I really tried to incorporating these type of mental health questions in my touch bases in a group format, right? And kind of just like went out there, started with a group, didn't do individuals. And the feedback was very positive, but they were all unanimously very honest with the fact that the very beginning of the internship period or the summer period, like it was just so uncomfortable and awkward.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like they still did it, and I think that was because again, I was there. They were reporting to me, but I mean, that was literally what happened. It was a very awkward thing in the beginning, and then it became naturalized. Then it became normalized, and then I was like, okay, it's cool to talk about how I'm waking up this morning, or that I'm having a pretty tough week, so maybe I'll have to come into work late, and I need to have a really, really, just honest conversation with my boss about work expectations, when I'll actually be working, and the fact that I'm not actually going to miss deadlines for deliverables. So this is a little bit of like a work scenario, but I feel like this definitely applies to the veterans community, right? With just like a couple of, and it doesn't have to always just be someone with influence, right? Anyone can be a change maker or facilitator.
Oh yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, so any individual such as yourself who's clearly been doing so much good work in this, but just one individual or a bunch, right? Gathering around another veterans member or two, and just talking about it, and just continue talking about it until, as you said, until it's the uncomfortable starts becoming comfortable. And I think that's a really exciting thing to take away from this.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so like on that end, how do you split your time with your two foundations, with the PTSD Foundation and the Arise Veteran Foundation? Because you're also, your doctorate. Are you still a doctoral candidate, or did you finish?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I'm still working on it.
Well,
It's going to take me a little while.
I've been looking at your material, your source material, so very excited for you. Okay, so how are you splitting your time between the three? Is it three?
Mm-hmm. And then family too. You want to count that as 4?
No, oh yeah, family is,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, yeah, family should be also its own sphere.
Yeah.
In my personal opinion, it should be its own sphere of investing time and effort and love. Yeah.
I mean, it's I can't really like assign a percentage to them. It's just like the PTSD, like it says I'm here and this is like my full time. This one demands a pretty good amount of my time. But the Arise, like whenever I can hop on, with whatever we're doing with Arise, I'm totally there doing that. So I guess it really just kind of depends on when needs arise. We kind of meet those needs.
I see.
And just being home with family it is always like a tranquil, and in fact, like one of the pieces that I'm really kind of excited about, and then potentially we'll have here on campus is, um, for me, a very therapeutic um, outlet is gardening. And one of the things that we've done within many of the foundations that we've been a part of, even with Arise and hopefully here within the PTSD Foundation, is horticultural therapy, and how many different types of alternative therapies. We try to engage as many of those as possible, and the reason is because that not everyone is going to respond to the same type. For example, art. Like I can appreciate art, but you don't want me making anything artful, because my art would get confused with their kindergartner's art. And you'd be like, you really messed up that stick figure. Did your daughter help you? No, I did that. So art is not an avenue for me that would exude relaxation. I would be like anxious and be like, I can't draw. So it wouldn't do that for me. Now horticulture though, like we go back to, again, like for me, the veteran purpose and seeing things like there's a tangible result from when I plant this. If I'm nurturing it, if I'm doing it right, it grows, it produces, it has purpose. So I'm nurturing that part of me that really is conditioned to think this way. So for me, it's very relaxing. I get a tangible result from it. I'm out there, getting dirty and being outside, which is what I absolutely love to do. So music therapy, I've always got music. These either like the speakers are really super loud, or I've got headphones in, constantly playing music, and it kind of drives my wife right crazy sometimes. She's like, "How can you focus on doing your doctoral work and have this music blaring in your ears at the same time?" It's like, actually, it really helps me focus hardcore.
Yeah.
So these
Likewise. Different kinds of music.
and the cool thing about alternative type therapies is they're replicable wherever you go. Um,
Right.
so it's something that's tangible that you could take with you, unlike, say a counseling, session, which is needed in many, many cases. If one of my outlets and I'm having a hard time is, say, painting, I could start painting, and I could literally self-counsel myself by utilizing some of these, alternative type therapies. And many of them are very, very helpful for individuals, depending on which one it is.
Yeah. And for those who are watching, I listed a couple of activities and some that Ryan mentioned, like gardening. That's part of horticulture therapy, right? A lot of sensory oriented activities, things like that really help with all kinds of improvement, whether it be things that are like cognitive or just to really encourage that nurturing sense or sense of meaning and purpose um, in your being, socialization, language skills. It's incredible what all these I would say like lifestyle things that people just take for granted, like just how fundamental they are to and conducive they are to the improvement of our actual well-being. So it's
Mhm.
really cool that you like gardening. That's actually a dream of mine. Once I can escape New York City or find a big enough place to actually have a garden that's one of my biggest dreams, a gardener farm. I also clearly really benefit from nature. I live by Central Park, particularly during COVID. It has, I mean, I hope it's been honed into everyone's minds in this neighborhood that nature and just the sensory experience that's offered by the outdoors has a direct correlation in terms of the improvement and the maintenance of your mental and emotional like well-being and state. So like with that said, like I know the Arise Foundation is really heavily involved in one type of project or along the lines of art therapy, and it has to do with leather. And I was wondering if you could kind of share a little bit about what you guys are doing, how that came about, what your employees and your veteran members actually do with it, and like the cool stuff you make.
So this is actually a really, really cool venture. This was brought about with a partnership with Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines was recycling their planes, and their seats are leather, and they were upgrading some of them, and they were like, "Well, we want to recycle, 100% of the plane if we can, but what can we do with this leather?" And we stepped up and we're like, well, let's see what we could do with this. And we started to take this leather and to make kits with it, and to put them in veterans care facilities as like tasks to be able to work with hand-eye coordination and really just mental acuity, to keep them sharp. But once we started to do this more, we started to realize that it was much bigger than just like, therapy kits for veterans wherever they're at. The Like the kits have blown up. We're now having shoes made. I mean, it's amazing what we're being able to make with some of this leather product that has been donated to us. That if it wasn't for Southwest Airlines, donating all this leather, we probably wouldn't have gotten into this venture before. But I think that the last count, if I remember correctly, and I could be off on this, is that 33,000 veterans received a kit of some sort, and they were able to really kind of work with the therapy, of building something, like even something as simple as creating a wallet out of these pieces.
Yeah.
It's like they can,
Most people
yeah.
can't they can't even make a functional wallet.
Mhm. Yeah, and just being able to kind of look at it and say, like, I have, you know, I have created this, taken all these pieces and put it together. It's very rewarding for an individual to create something.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think I had the pleasure of, speaking with another one of the board members, and just like seeing all the pictures of all the products, and they're so well made. And the fact that, like the nonprofit and like a nonprofit and corporate, like a for-profit company can partner in so
Hmm.
full away, and also for yeah, just like the uplifting of other people's lives, and just also creating very useful, very, very functional products, I think is some of the most incredible success stories and ways for like having purpose driven work, and like the white collar sphere, so to speak. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. And as we kind of wrap up this convo, I wanted to kind of uh, ask you if there's anything else you wanted to share to the Made of Millions community. Yeah.
Um, you know, I guess the biggest thing is one of the kind of one I talked about before, and that's be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and really kind of as much as we don't like doing it, get in somebody else's bubble of influence. Because here's one thing that's pretty interesting. Okay, you if you get in their bubble of influence, meaning talking about the things that are uncomfortable, and essentially that one person's bubble has all of these other people that are in that person's bubble. And just by being uncomfortable one time, you could essentially influence that, which influences more. I mean, it is a crazy domino effect of what happens when we stop being so isolated as a culture, and really start to um, you know hey, how are you? Let's get into that.
That's coffee.
Mhm. Absolutely. And stop being well, just listening to conversations and really listening to what is being said, and being involved, and not checking out.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It was a pleasure having you, Ryan. And just thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for uh, giving us an opportunity to kind of look into your community. And just thank you for everything that you and and your friends have done for our country and for the world. But yeah, so guys, thank you for everyone else who's watching. Thank you for joining us on another well-made episode. If you're interested in learning more about, the PTSD Foundation of America or the Arise Veteran Foundation, there's a link over here and a link over there in case you guys are interested in supporting or being involved. Thanks, Ryan, for coming.
Thank you for having me. It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah.